Welcome to Behind the Headlines, the weekly webcast talking about all things Palo Alto. We're going to give you the stories behind the stories that you've read on Palo Alto Weekly and Palo Alto Online. I'm Jocelyn Dong, editor of the Palo Alto Weekly, and every week we're going to bring you some context, history, and some of the behind-the-scenes wranglings about the issues that affect Palo Altans' lives. I'm joined today by Palo Alto Weekly publisher Bill Johnson, General Assignments reporter Sue Dremann, and City Hall reporter Gennady Sheyner. We're going to talk about minimum wage and airplane noise this week. So Gennady, new minimum wage for Palo Alto, was this largely a symbolic act?
In some respect it is, just because of the sense I get is that not that many people in Palo Alto compared to other communities will be impacted by this. And the reason I say that is just because the showing at the Council chambers on Monday and throughout the various debates have been a little bit underwhelming.
Yeah, you actually had some difficulty finding the low-wage workers who this will actually affect.
Yeah, we have heard from several merchants who made comments to the effect of nobody in Palo Alto pays minimum wage, and what they mean is that there certainly are some people who get it, like teenagers and people in the service industry, but I think most people have a sense that the kind of people who technically get minimum wage are waiters who make a lot in tips and whose pay is actually a lot higher than that.
Mm-hmm. I find it interesting that this is kind of one of those issues that's ideological on one hand, and then there's the question of practicality on the other. I mean, the City Council is no stranger to passing resolutions having to do with largely symbolic acts, whether that's Citizens United, Myanmar military, or
Palo Alto Terry.
Exactly, the adorable stuffed ambassador. In this case, though, I mean, Palo Alto is following a trend that's national. San Francisco, Seattle, LA, lots of cities, jumping on the bandwagon, and it was a unanimous vote.
Right, you get a sense, and this is a case of like the City Council kind of being swept up in a movement that goes way beyond its borders. A lot of the foundation has already been laid by neighboring cities, which means the council didn't have to spend that much time getting into the nuts and bolts of the ordinance. They're kind of just essentially doing what Mountain View and Sunnyvale did recently. Palo Alto's wage will be $11 in 2016, so it's a little higher than the $10.30 the other cities are. Yeah. But because there's so much that's already been done, it was pretty easy for Palo Alto, which is a pretty left-leaning city, to completely get behind it and pretty much adopt it with very little debate.
Were there any speakers during the public portion who spoke against the minimum wage adoption or asked for it to be delayed?
There were nobody really spoke against the idea of having minimum wage. It was more about the details. A few people from the restaurant industry felt the minimum wage in the ways being applied in Palo Alto and some of the other California cities, pretty much all the other California cities that have adopted it, would have a negative impact on people who aren't waiters, because that was kind of the big concern from the speakers.
I didn't really understand that restaurant argument, because as I understood it, the restaurant argument was that the wait staff at a restaurant is paid minimum wage because they're required to pay minimum wage, but the bulk of their income comes through tips. And the argument, as I understood it, was that unless you included the tips, you were sort of unfairly benefiting those wait staff members to the detriment of kitchen workers and other people that are also at the lower end of the wage scale. But why can't a restaurant simply change their tip distribution formula so that the new plan is that of the tips taken in, a little bit less is going to go to the wait staff, and other tips are going to be shared with the rest of the employees? Seems to me that's an easy problem to fix. Am I missing something?
This has happened in some of the other cities like Oakland, where some restaurants are applying, they're getting away from the tip system and doing something called service charges.
But that's a little different.
Well, it's something that could be shared, and it doesn't have to stay with the waiter. It could go to the kitchen staff, the janitors, and whatnot. That's not a very popular idea with many businesses or many waiters, because they would see, their wage go way down. The people who get tips currently, now they will have to share with others.
But that's all controllable by the owner of the restaurant, and that doesn't need to be a dramatic change. It just means to be a change enough to to keep stable the wait staff.
Yeah, I mean, they could come up, I'm sure, with complicated formulas in which the waiter could keep some and give away the others. I'm not sure if too many places have really thought about this kind of
How they would implement it.
complex matrix, but I think the big argument from the restaurants is if they're paying the waiting staff $9 now and they'd have to raise it to $11, then the extra money that they're paying, which doesn't include all the tips, cannot go to managers who in some case make less than waiters or janitors or dishwashers or anyone else who's back at the house.
Yeah.
So there'd be a redistribution, the restaurants are saying, of all the wages and the wage levels for all their staff.
Yes.
And that would affect their... So, I mean, that's one of the things that has been kind of promoted by the industries, that anytime you raise wages artificially, then it's going to affect pricing of goods to people. Perhaps some people will have to be laid off, or their hours will be shrunk. And of course, things that they don't mention is that their profits, will go down. That's also an alternative.
Right.
Have we seen any business owners in Palo Alto who are considering any of those options, which are, the laying off of staff, or that their prices have gone up when they raised wages for their people?
Well, slightly. I mean, I know like earlier this week, our photographer Veronica was doing the rounds downtown, and she has spoke to some people who, I know in Pizza My Heart, they had to raise the price of pizza from $29.50 to $32, I think. Must have been a really large pizza.
Pie.
it's a big pie.
Quite a pie.
But that happened right when they kind of raised the wages of its employees. So I think there's a ton of studies on minimum wage, and pretty much whatever position you have, you could probably find a study to justify your position. But I think the one I was looking at recently, it came out of Berkeley, but basically it says that many of the big fears about workers being laid off or kind of hours being reduced, that hasn't really materialized so far. But as far as prices being slightly raised, that does happen. So that's kind of an impact that Palo Alto residents could expect. We might see pizza become a little more expensive.
But aren't we talking too about there's just such a disproportionate difference in wages, in the whole wage structure? You've got people at the top, let's say the so-called 1%ers, and they're making all the money. So couldn't they take a little bit less and let some of the money trickle down to the bottom? Because when you look at how much people have to pay just to live here, for example, I mean, there's no way that people can stay here. If you're on a minimum wage job, you either have to travel a very long way, or you have to live in accommodations, live in places where you have many people, inhabiting one home, one small home or one small apartment. So, I mean, there is inflation, but it's in a different way.
I think the problem is that you're not going to solve that problem, which is a huge problem, by $1 or $3 change in the minimum wage.
True, but
so it gets back to Jocelyn's original point that is this really largely a symbolic gesture, which has its value.
Yeah, it does seem to be symbolic because it really doesn't have much effect.
Yeah, and you mentioned, most of the workers who'd be impacted can't live here. I mean, they have to commute from quite far, and that's kind of one of the reasons why many of the business owners who did speak on this issue, like in the chamber meeting in May, they speak off the record, but they did debate this issue. Many of them basically said that we don't pay minimum wage anyway because nobody would come here. They have to drive too far. There's nowhere to park. Right. So the market kind of really takes care of itself. And that does kind of go into the fact that this is largely symbolic.
Well, the council members also mentioned that themselves. They said that this is not something that's going to all of a sudden enable people to be living in Palo Alto. This is just something that will make them more comfortable in their own lives, wherever it is that they're living.
Yeah, that was a comment by Mark Berman. I think it's also worth pointing out that this is only the first step, and they do want to eventually get to $15 by 18, which I think would have a much bigger impact and could have some tangible differences on businesses. I think it's hard to dispute that. Yeah. And the issues that they did not reach kind of like a good resolution on, like the one Bill mentioned with the tipped workers and seasonal teenagers, that is something that they committed to discussing next year.
Is that being referred to policy and services then?
Yes, their committee will explore it, and they'll see if in future iterations of the minimum wage increase they could kind of consider these issues and make some distinctions.
Yeah.
Gennady, do you think the silence of the Chamber of Commerce on this issue before the council was due to the fact that there were conflicting views within the membership of the chamber, since they obviously represent restaurants as well as businesses that have no need to worry about the minimum wage, or for some other reason. I mean, it seems remarkable that the organization representing businesses in town didn't have any kind of a statement on
They didn't
this.
even show up at the meeting. Yeah, I think partly this is resignation, kind of. It's going to pass anyway. All the council members said they like it, like so. They knew it's coming, whether they make a statement or not.
Yeah.
Part of it may have to do, like, for the same reason many of the merchants didn't speak out, like outside the chamber. It's like they may see it as bad publicity. Kind of here you have kind of the business leaders speaking against workers getting $11 an hour. And I think a third reason could be just, as they say so clearly, nobody here pays minimum wage, so
Right.
why panic now? Maybe when it goes to $12 or $13, we'll have more speakers, and particularly from the small business community, I hope, which has faced most of the impacts.
Yeah, one of the things I found most interesting is just the Palo Alto officials' kind of stance towards regional cooperation. In some ways, maybe it's not surprising that Palo Alto city council members want to make sure that whatever laws they pass really are tailored to the needs of this particular community. But at the same time, there's Mountain View, there's Sunnyvale, there's kind of this regional county push to sort of align everyone's minimum wage ordinances. And my understanding is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this has something to do with trying to get a standard region-wide so that there's an unusual economic effect as people kind of migrate to cities that are paying more.
Yeah, that's the argument from like Mountain View and Sunnyvale mayors who are trying to get Palo Alto to sort of follow their schedule for increases going up to 15 to 18. The idea is that, if one city has a different wage structure than the other, workers might move, businesses might relocate. I don't know. It's I'm not sure how valid that is. I mean, the cost of relocating a business compared to $1, I don't know. But that is the argument. But this is a case where I feel like the council is trying to sort of take the middle passage, learning from Buddha here, basically. They're talking like, we want to coordinate, but they're pretty firm about the fact that they don't want to mimic and they want to kind of do what works best for Palo Alto business.
I want to go back to the teenage worker question because it seems to me that restaurants aside, and I understand that's kind of a unique situation, that the teenage worker is really, in a community like ours and others on the peninsula, is that group is most likely to be impacted by this, or at least there's more to debate about the effects of this on teenage workers. Was any alternative presented to the council by the city attorney's office or anybody else as to what options they might have in dealing with the teenage worker and ensuring that there's not a skewed result from this?
No, nothing was presented this week, but they did make a specific request that they will analyze it in the next round, at which time I expect the city attorney to perform this work, but to date they pretty much kept it simple. They went along with the Sunnyvale and Mountain View approach, which makes no distinctions. But they did recognize that teenage workers are one of the big kind of groups that they need to kind of tinker with the ordinance to kind of accommodate. So that's to come next year.
And how would this affect families or homeowners that employ a teenager to do something like babysitting or yard work or things like that?
Actually, that is exempted in the ordinance. I don't remember the exact language. I could look it up. I have it in front of here. It might take me a few minutes to flip.
Please
independent
don't.
contractor.
Yeah, there is a clause. So
Exempting household workers or something?
Yeah, I think it gives babysitter as an example in parentheses to describe the general class of workers who are like independent.
Okay, good.
All right, well, we'll follow this issue as it progresses through the Policy and Services Committee.
For at least 3 more years.
Exactly, till we get to $15. Now we'll move from an issue that is the City Council joining a larger movement to a larger movement overhead that the City Council really can't do very much about, which is airplane noise. So this issue came up among the residents last year, and Sue, you wrote about the initial complaints over too much air noise as a result of the FAA changing flight paths. But I just find this really interesting because it's largely a politically, not driven, an issue that has to be addressed politically. The City Council can't do a darn thing to influence the FAA. It's not in control over the planes that are overhead. This week, however, there has been a little bit of movement by the City Council and the county, and our representative, Anna Eshu, is also involved. So maybe we can start off by just looking at what has the city tried to do, especially with the community roundtable, for example, to have some sort of influence, since last year.
Well, I think
Airplane noise.
the city was trying to get on there's an SFO, San Francisco Airport roundtable that is supposed to be dealing with noise complaints. And then they kind of all gather together and try to figure out how to work with SFO officials to reduce the noise complaints. However, that's all made up of people in all the cities from San Mateo County. And Santa Clara County is not included in that at all, and Palo Alto is not included in it. And city officials have tried to get onto this roundtable for some time, and they have been not enabled to do that because supposedly the charters for each city are separate and they would have to change that information. So they don't see how they could arrange it. But it's
governed by some group? I mean, is this run by the airport, or
I'm not clear exactly.
They can't join?
Well, apparently it's board members themselves. You know, they look at the whole picture, and I think really it's probably being driven by the airport officials themselves in terms of, you know, not allowing them to come on. But there are some cities that just feel that it's, you know, there's just not a whole consensus on it. There are a few advocates, like I think the town of Woodside is an advocate to bring Palo Alto on. And I think they did say, well, you can come and sort of sit in with our subcommittees and put input in that way. One thing that I've heard from East Palo Alto residents is that we do have the ability to have a seat. And so if Palo Alto wanted to work with us, because they do also have an issue with the Palo Alto airport, but if you wanted to, you know, get together with us and work things out, then maybe we can help you.
So is East Palo Alto currently on the community roundtable?
They are not, but they could be. And so I don't know why they aren't. I haven't found out that information yet about why they don't have a seat there, but they certainly could join.
Okay.
I think this is pure politics. The SFO roundtable, there's nothing that would prevent them from allowing any city to participate, but it suits the purposes of the existing members to not expand it to Santa Clara County, because that is then just going to open up the question of, have air traffic patterns intentionally shifted south of San Mateo County in order to protect the members of the roundtable who have some degree of political influence with the airport and with the airlines, and so and probably indirectly the FAA.
So it also dilute the power of each board member that currently sits if you expand it by a lot.
Right. Well, plus there is no power. This roundtable has absolutely no authority to do anything. So it's really an organization that exists to have people meet once a month and complain to each other about whatever the noise situations are in their communities.
Right, and that's something that's been brought up as well, that they really don't have any influence. Some of the other things that are happening, though, is that we now have the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors has now put out this resolution to FAA that they want to see some sort of a timetable. And they've done something that even Anna Eshoo has not done, and she said that she didn't think that there would be political solution, that there would be a need to go in and do anything legislatively. That she's still working from the perspective that perhaps they can work with the FAA to work out the kinks in the system.
Well, but part of that is the fact that since the Democrats don't control the Congress right now, Anna Eshoo trying to get legislation through is going to be next to impossible.
And I think you brought that up in your editorial.
Yeah.
So
she's going to have to do her magic with the administration, I think.
Right, but it is the Board of Supervisors themselves did put into their resolution that they think there needs to be some legislative changes. And one of the things they're talking about is to raise or change the way the standards for decibel levels. Currently they're at 65 decibels. It's kind of like you can't go over that. And that's the, hurting my ears, I can't think type of level. However, the bigger problem is that's a figure that's been on the books since the 1970s. And now we have a whole different class of jets. We have many more planes that are coming in. So the sheer volume of air traffic it's time for a reassessment.
So, Bill, you worked in Washington way back.
Way back.
and have some understanding of how things work there. The Quiet Skies Caucus, the group of members of Congress who are affected by this in their jurisdictions, how do those caucuses work? How powerful are they, or are they just a meeting group of people who are concerned and want to look like they're doing something?
Yeah, my experience dates back a long time ago, but I think those congressional caucuses serve an important role in that Congress people from all over the country that share common interests and problems can become a louder voice for advocating change than any single member of Congress. So, you've got every caucus is arranged from the Black Caucus, which obviously is quite large, to a Women's Caucus, to, moderate portions of either party. And I'd never heard of this Quiet Skies Caucus. It sounds like it's got maybe a dozen members, which isn't enough to really throw their weight around too
I think
much.
about 25.
Is that right?
That was the last count.
Yeah. So, it really, I think, is more a function of how much power and influence those individual members have over the leadership in their bodies and in the administration. And that's why in today's editorial we kind of challenge Eshu because she's been in Congress for more than 2 decades.
Yeah,
she has strong ties to Democratic Party politics, to the Obama administration, to Nancy Pelosi, and she's in a really good position, I think, to throw some of her influence around and try to get something done on this.
One thing that I find interesting is that there are nonetheless grassroots organizations who don't really have any influence, and even the City Council this week passed a consent calendar item to study airplane noise. What kind of effects, I'm wondering, are these groups, Sky Posse?
Sky Posse,
and then
for
there's
one.
a lawsuit
out of Portola Valley, yeah.
I mean, how much effect can all of those groups have really on the decision makers in this kind of situation?
It's like a trickle-up effect. Things don't
I think that's right.
Things don't trickle up very fast. It's like they have gravity working against them. Okay, they've been effective to some extent. I'll give them credit. I mean, first of all, there's a ton of residents who've been engaged in this issue. The number of complaints has skyrocketed. It was like 2,700 in June of this year, compared to like
5,000 for
compared to 60 in June of last year. So it's like, and so they've been successful in pressuring the city council, which has been successful in pressuring the county supervisors, and collectively they're pressuring, the house. So far they've at least had some effect. It's kind of more than I could expect from just a regular citizen trying to make a difference. They've already gotten some resolutions passed this week, as you just pointed out. The council passed a resolution kind of similar to the one that Sue mentioned from the county, but they also did something else, which is that they committed to actually funding a study. They allowed staff to issue requests for proposals for firms that would actually get more data about airplane noise, especially low-flying airplanes, so that when they go back to the FAA and try to do something about this, they'll have a lot more data and hopefully will have a louder voice. But trickling up takes a while.
I would say that's largely, I'm going to go out on a limb here, but I think that's largely a symbolic effort.
More symbols.
Because by the time the city goes through all of its processes, by the time a study gets done, by the time some action is taken, such as passing a resolution at the end of that study that tries to convey that information, we're way into 2016. Well, we've got we're going to have a change in whoever's running the FAA with a new administration. It may be a new Democratic administration, which means less change, but still there's going to be a period of a lot of transition, and we've got to get something done on this issue. If there's going to be an answer to this issue, it's going to happen in the next 12 months, I think, and it's going to happen largely behind closed doors.
That's how it's going to get resolved, but this is still Palo Alto, and having more data never hurts. So.
Well, and feeling like we're doing something. I mean, there's value to feeling like we're doing something. Yeah.
But I also think this has been pointed out, that Palo Alto is not. This is not a community that's just in a vacuum in terms of its knowledge base. I mean, there are some very high-powered people that are in on this, that have a lot of information and knowledge about aviation, and we have scientists. Sky Posse has tapped into a lot of those people. So I think that the data that they're going to present and their knowledge base is such that they're not going to allow the FAA to just, do some lip service. Whether or not they're really going to have any, full effect over the FAA remains to be seen. What's happened in some cities where these next gen has been rolled out and is creating a lot of noise, tremendous amount of noise, like around Phoenix and Chicago, for example. Their representatives are going in Congress are putting riders on the appropriations bills for FAA, and that means you either make the changes or you don't get money. You've got to make the changes within 90 days. You've got to show us a plan for making the changes. So in that way, that may be the, they say money talks, and that may be the only way that you really get anything done.
Well, very good. We will continue looking at that issue and hear what happens in Washington about it. We have just a little bit of time left, and I kind of wanted to talk about something that happened at the council this week, where some council members were not too happy with some planning commission members. Gennady, what was exactly the issue that came up there?
Yeah, well, the Planning Commission received an assignment from the council, which is basically we want to reform planned community zoning, which everybody knows it's kind of the most contentious form of zoning in Palo Alto, which allows developers to barter with the city over zoning exemptions and public benefits, which pretty vague definition.
You need the air quotes there.
Yeah, well, public benefits.
Okay.
It's a very vague term and very loaded term for some people, but and basically the Planning Commission took this assignment and they basically took a stance against the council's direction. They basically said, they like planned communities. They think planned community zones are very valuable. They basically called it a wrong approach. And this week, the council, the commission's recommendation came back to the council, and the reforms that were proposed, pretty much everybody in the council agreed they would accomplish very little, if anything. So
the reforms would change nothing.
Yeah, they would still allow developers to pay for zoning exemptions, which is kind of one of the more contentious things. They create some new pre-screening requirements to try to add a little more transparency, but the main things that people complain about this process would kind of remain intact. Okay. And so, one council member kind of took issue, Pat Burt. He thought there was quite a disconnect. Tom Du Bois also used that term between what the commission actually did and what they were assigned to do by the council.
Yeah.
I think this issue, the relationship between the council and the planning commission, may end up being the political story of the year here, depending on how it plays out. But, they are not at all on the same page.
But I think the chiding from this Monday actually spilled over into the Wednesday meeting of the Planning Commission, in which they discussed another proposal that they absolutely hate, the office cap. But this time, after the comments that were made on Monday, they reluctantly, with all the joy of a child swallowing medicine, voted 4-2 to support an office cap, excluding coordinated area plan areas. So, but yeah, it was an issue last year. I mean, it was an issue when the outgoing city council
appointed,
and it's final meeting of the year or almost final, appointed many new members who the new majority doesn't particularly feel are aligned with them, and we're seeing the after effects.
It's not the first time that a commission has been sort of out of step with the council. The council completely has reversed something that the commissions have done, and the commissioners tend to say, well, our mandate is just to look at this specifically and not kind of the surrounding issues. But the Planning Commission got a pretty clear directive, I would say, from the council. And
dressing down.
Dressing down. But the commission itself is fairly young, right? I mean, there are a lot of new members on the commission, and they are young. I mean, and they perhaps have a different outlook.
One is 64, but the rest are younger.
64 is young.
I thought it was interesting. We had this funny deal at the council on Monday night where some of the people that have been most vocal against planned community negotiated, public benefits, like the mayor, were actually defending keeping the planned community zone. How bizarre was that?
As bizarre as members like Greg Scharf saying they want to kill it, even though he's been consistent with
it. Was just all over the map at that.
The weird thing about the whole planned community zone distinction is that it really broke the kind of the usual slates that they're in. I think everybody agrees that it's broken, so in a way, this divisive ordinance is actually quite unifying. They all hate it. The disagreement is on how to fix it, and
whether to fix it.
Well, yeah, whether to fix it or just kill it at all. Nobody's arguing that it's good at the way it is. But the funny thing is about the mayor's position, the position of Pat Bird, and other people who want to keep it, it's not because they think it's valuable, but it's because they think there's so much else that's wrong outside the PC process, with individual review of houses, with all sorts of things, and those are the things that need to be fixed, as opposed to just killing PC and moving on with your life. So that's kind of their position, but it is a little strange to have this kind of reverse of stances.
How common is it to have a PC ordinance in cities? Do you know?
It's pretty common. People, different cities call it different things. And San Francisco doesn't usually call it I forget the name right now, but there's usually some mechanism for developers to propose ways to kind of exceed zoning exemptions. So Palo Alto wasn't alone in that. What's different in Palo Alto is that the way it's been used in the last 5 years is so different from the way it's been used when it was envisioned that it's really kind of become more of a hot button issue. I should say 5-10 years.
So in the end, the council decided to delay looking at the PC reforms until after the comp plan.
What did you say? We're going to do it ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's not going to be completed till the end of 2016.
That's optimistic.
If then.
With fingers crossed.
Yeah, I think the end result is there won't be any planned communities for at least a few years now.
Yeah. So we're on hiatus permanently, perhaps. We'll see. Okay, well, we'll wrap it up for today. Thanks for the great discussion. To check out all of the news, go to www.paloaltoonline.com, or you can check us out on Twitter at Palo Alto Weekly.